Good afternoon, everybody. Richard De Silva here from Banyard Solutions. Welcome to our webinar on the new setup of ePermits, which is now a very modular system. I'm going to just give it a couple more minutes. I've just seen more names popping up on my sheet. So just give a couple more minutes and we'll get started, just to allow the last few people to log in. Okay, quite a few more names just suddenly pop up on my screen. So I did mean a couple of seconds rather than a couple of minutes. Sorry about that. So we'll get started. And of course, the webinar is being recorded and it's made available to all attendees and all registrants. So anybody that misses anything can always catch up again with it a little bit later. Okay, so modular ePermits. For anybody that's familiar with ePermits in the past, it was pretty well an all or nothing system. Very comprehensive coverage on things such as managing permits, managing compliance, making sure that everything was absolutely right. Customer feedback over the last few years has been it would be better if we had ways of splitting some of this out. And you can see on the screen it says that the modules of the core system, there are 4 of them: permit workflow, contractor compliance, worker compliance, and RAMS compliance. And we had a couple of customers a few years ago that would say to us, well, hang on, we've already got our training and competency for all contractors that come on site managed in another system. We already manage our RAMs in another system. So we're just going to be recreating everything in the ePermit system, which, whilst it's not necessarily a bad thing, it means you've now got to maintain 2 systems in synchronization all the time. So we're in the process of developing a new user interface for the product. And as part of that, we've been doing a lot of work on the background software to enable that new platform to be far more effective. So what we've done is we've actually managed to split out lots of modules and additional functional modules as well, so that people can actually mix and match the permitting system that they need, ranging from the lowest level, which is basically just digitizing paper, right the way up to a fully compliant system with electronic signatures, totally paperless, single sign-on to existing internal systems, and so forth. So that's really what I want to go through a little bit of today, is to take you through the changes in the system, and hopefully it might ring some bells with people that are on the call today. And if you're interested in talking about how ePermits could work for you later, we'd be very happy to speak to you. So, okay, the permit workflow module is the core module. It's the root of it. And that's the one that actually monitors the workflow of a permit request. So if someone raises a permit request, it's then routed to the person or persons that are allowed to approve a permit. It also then ensures that only the right people can issue a permit and only the right people can close permits off. The contractor compliance module looks at things such as insurances. The worker compliance looks at training and competencies, and RAMS, fairly self-explanatory, it looks at managing the RAMS side of things. So if you just take, for example, permit workflow, the system is not doing any checks on contractor, worker, or RAMS compliance. It relies on you and your existing systems as to how that is managed. On top of that, we have additional modules in functional modules to enhance the user capability of the system. We've also split out into different types of configurations. So we have what we call ePermits Lite, which is the permit workflow only, the minimum system, as I said earlier on, just basically digitizing paper. And ePermits Lite can also consist of the permit workflow module plus any 1 or 2 of the core modules. ePermits Lite Plus is the above plus any of the additional modules, the optional ones, electronic signatures, PPE, document management, and so forth. The full ePermit system is all 4 core modules, and then you have ePermits Plus, which is all 4 core modules, plus any additional modules. Now, commercially, the way we've set this up as well, it doesn't make any difference to the ultimate cost of the product if you start right down here at permit workflow only, and then over time add all the modules as you go. The end cost is exactly the same as it would have been on the initial cost for the elements of software. So they're all priced as a percentage. Okay, so what does the permit workflow module do? The permit workflow module has a number of template data sets for buildings. So we have things that I'll refer to later on called standard data sets. So a typical office, a typical data center, a typical hospital campus, various things like that, where we can immediately upload data into a system. And all the end customer is required to do is actually just modify that to meet their actual needs. So if they don't have, for example, I don't know, communal tea areas, they just take that off the list of potential location types within the system. The system also, the workflow manages the contractors, and contractors are involved in the permit request process. Now you can use the system to either request permits on behalf of your contractors, so you do it yourself, or you can get your contractors to make those requests and then submit them to you. So contractors are enabled to create those requests and then submit them. When they're submitted, they'll go through to the client or the FM for the first level, which is access permit approval. You'll see in the system later that whenever a job is requested, there is always a route access permit. So it allows me on site. And then within that access permit, if there are any high risk activities, working at height, confined spaces, explosive materials, welding and brazing, they all then become additional high risk permits bundled up as part of that overall permit request. So the high risk permits, they go to APs, the approvers within the FM or the client organization. They can also ensure that permits are then printed or go through the electronic signature process. Only certain APs can issue permits, only certain APs can close permits, and you define who is allowed to do what within your organization. Within the system, it obviously stores the documents. There's an archive of all the permits that have been created and closed out. And that's obviously there for audit purposes, any review purposes and so forth. And the time duration that these can be held on for is client-based. So we have some clients that don't really want to hold on to anything over 7 years. So they get a report from us every year that says these are now the things that have gone beyond 7 years. And they say, yep, we want to keep these ones and we want to delete those ones. And we go through, a number of levels of making sure that we are able to delete the records that they want. But things, for example, like asbestos have to be maintained for a lot longer than 7 years. So those ones have to stay. The system also stores the audit trail, who does what, where, and how. So who approved the permits, when was it approved, who submitted RAMs, when were they submitted, who approved the RAMs, and so forth. So all of that is kept up to date within the system, again, for investigative purposes, should there be any investigations on anything. And the system obviously provides a reporting capability so that you can create any ad hoc reports. So I want to see all of the hotworks permits done on this site between these dates by this contractor, for example. So that's permit workflow. That's the core module that actually is the root of everything within the permit system. Now, in no particular order, gosh, sounds a bit like I'm a celebrity there. The next module is RAMS compliance. This is the module that manages the risk assessments and method statements for the jobs that you're coming in to do. So if I've never done a job before, I need to submit RAMs into the system so that when I go through a permit request process, I can actually select approved RAMs that are there. So you'll see later on in the system that when there's a list of RAMs appearing, they are only RAMs that have been approved by the client company. If I haven't got RAMs in the system, I can't submit a permit request. So the RAMs module allows submission of RAMs by a contractor. It allows, through a workflow process, the approval of those RAMs by the technical authorities and APs at the client. and it also then manages those RAMs. So RAMs can have a life expectancy period of 1 year, a validity period of a year, and the system will then continuously flag up when things need to be renewed and so forth to the client and also to the contractor. The next one we look at is something called contractor compliance. This does a number of things. It's actually the simplest module within the system. So it is the most inexpensive module within the system. But the principal thing it does, it looks at things such as insurance checking. So contractors are asked to upload their information about their insurances, what level of cover do they have. Because you can set rules within the system that says if I'm having such a job done, then I need this level of public indemnity insurance, whatever type of insurances that you want. And the system will then cross-check against that and make sure that the contractor is adequately insured. It also tracks the dates. So if the insurance was on the 12th of December 2018, it'll be flagging up now that that insurance is going to be need to be renewed next week. And it'll warn you as the client that you need the contractor will need to provide this. If it goes beyond that date, the system flags up to the contractor when they create a permit request that your insurances are now out of date and they will need to provide the correct level of insurance before any permits will be issued. The system also manages asbestos contractors, so logs again if a contractor is an authorised asbestos contractor. And there's also what we call a vendor approval process within the system. So when you first start off and you start loading contractors in, they can put their information into the system, but they're not able to start generating permits until you've reviewed all their information and you go, yes, I'm happy, that contractor is now approved within the e-permit system. And then they can then start creating permit requests within the system. The next is probably the most complicated one, which is the worker compliance module. And this does a whole range of checks on everything from training and competency to inductions to security checks, eligibility to work in the UK, etc. So a contractor is required to upload information about their employee, such as is this person trained in work at height? And if so, what date were they trained? This isn't really GDPR sensitive information. It's information that you have at this point in time anyway, and you have to have for the purposes of ensuring that people are properly trained and qualified to be on site. So the system will hold that information. The contractors also have the option of uploading the certificate into the system so that you can do spot checks and show that it actually is correct, that this person is currently trained and the active live certificate is in the system. You can also do checks on things such as eligibility to work in the UK. These are just tags, so the contractor will tick the box that says, yes, this person is eligible to work in the UK. And obviously by doing all the ticking of the boxes, they are the ones that are actually taking the responsibility for factually correct information. So it's generally just an administrator of the contract that will fill this information in. It's not everybody that could possibly come on site has the ability to go in there and tick their own boxes. And then we finally have a whole range of additional modules now. The most popular one is what we call electronic signatures. This makes the whole process now completely paperless. So in the process of issuing a permit and in closing a permit, signatures are required, as you'll all know, are typically on pieces of paper at the moment. What we do in any permits is electronically recreate those paper permits, and then electronic signatures are done in the same way as you would do when you're picking up your Amazon parcel. So the contractor would sign, and also so would the AP sign, and then that permit can be issued, and the same at the back end of the process when it's closed. The contractor will sign to say, yes, the job's done, and the AP will sign to say, yes, that you confirm the job has been done and has been done to your satisfaction, and then the permit is closed. Another popular one is the video induction and test. This allows you to actually conduct inductions through the e-permit system. So you can load your corporate induction video at the front end of the system, and anybody that hasn't been inducted and their record in e-permit shows they're not inducted can actually undertake the induction process through e-permits in their own time. So they don't need to be on site to go through the induction process. That way they can ensure that the induction has been completed and passed before they come to site, thereby saving time of having to sit in the security office and go through induction process. In essence, what happens, you embed your video into the system. The system will have then maybe 50 questions sitting behind it, and it'll randomly pick 10, and you've got to score 9 out of 10 to be inducted. And if you fail, you have to go through the induction process again. So it's a way of checking that you actually seen the video by asking the questions pertinent to that. But it's all what you set up. So it's your video, they're your questions, and it's your rules as to what the pass rate needs to be. Another interesting one that we only launched a few months ago is PPE. So now contractors can specify the PPE that they want to bring, or they were bringing on site to do the job that they're coming on to do. That goes through the review process in the permit approval process, and you, the client, can actually add to that list of PPE. So, for example, you may be having some construction work done, so therefore you want to add on there that they need to bring face masks as well, whereas perhaps in normal circumstances they might not need it. But it's you deciding you want to add some extra precautions into the process, and you're adding to the PPE. You will be able to start to specify standard bits of PPE as default. Therefore, if your rule says everybody that comes on site must have hard hat, high-vis vest, and safety boots, that will automatically default whenever a permit request is being made, and that's coming in a later iteration of the product. And also, there's one called automatic permit splitting. One of the things that a lot of contractors say to us was, gosh, it can be a bit tedious when we're coming on site to do maybe a 5-day job, but the client's rule says that they can only have one permit a day, so one access permit a day, but we're coming on site for 5 days. So I've actually got to go into the system and I have to create 5 separate access permits, because if I do one for 5 days, the system just kicks me out and tells me I've broken the rule, which is one access permit per day. So what we've done now is we've modified the system so that you can put into the system how long you're going to be there for the access permit, or for any of the high-risk permits, and the system will then automatically split that according to the client rules as to how many permits are required. So if, for example, I'm doing hot works and it's over 3 days, and the rule is I can only do hot works in shifts, it will automatically split that out into 3 separate hot works permits within the period of time. So that saved our contractors a lot of time on that process. Okay, so that's the modules. In terms of the implementation, I mentioned to you earlier that we have this concept now of standard data implementation, and the old way, what we always used to do, is what's called custom data implementation. Let me just explain that a little bit. When you build an e-permit system, one of the things that it can come up with is things like clashes. So it can say for you, for example, I have got 2 jobs taking place in the same place at the same time. And that's flown up at the approval process, so you're able to make some objective decisions on whether you can allow those two jobs to take place at the same time. To do that, you actually need to have defined within there where things are within your building. So a building is typically a site. Within a site, you have what we call zones, and they are typically things like floors, basement, roof. It could be the car park. It could be the grounds outside. They're the zones. And within zones, you have location types. So I have plant rooms, and they live in the basement. Within location types, you have locations. I've got boiler room 1, or I've got the CEO's office, which exists on the top floor in a group called offices. And I've got services, so my air conditioning units and so forth. So all of these things need to be logged together so that we know exactly where a particular service is in a particular location, which is a member of location types, and therefore where it exists within the building. It can be quite a laborious process. There are some simple spreadsheets that we get you to fill in, and then we can bulk upload the data. But it does delay the start of the system by, it can be a couple of months before you can get all that data in, and you can now run permit. What we have done over the last few months is actually create what we call standard data sets. So a standard data set is something that we've created that says this is a typical office. This is a typical data center. This is a typical hospital. And so therefore it's already pre-populated with all of the location types, so plant rooms, offices, canteen facilities, and so forth. It's located, includes all the different services, so air conditioning, boilers, and all those sort of things as well. They're already configured. But in terms of locations, we actually restrict it in standard data, just 2 zones. So there's an inside and an outside of the building. This means that you can actually generate permits really quickly, and it actually means there's no difference to the current process you go through. And I'll show you that in a moment on the system, where I'll create a permit request in a standard data set for exactly the same job that I'm going to create in the custom data implementation with all the information. It means you can start very quickly within a few days actually generating permits and then decide how and when you want to refine that and bring it down. So particularly in places like hospitals or what we call campuses, where you have a range of different buildings. Simple buildings, inside and outside is fine. We don't need to go into any more detail than that. But the complicated buildings, yes, I want to put in there how many floors I've got, where exactly my services are, because that's critical from a permitting point of view. So I'll show you a little bit of that within the system. So I'm going to run you through a very quick demonstration of the system and bring all of those points into play. So I'm going to run a simple scenario. So I am one of your contractors. I'm going to create a job request and show you how the system can trap all of those things that we talked about in terms of competences and so on. And then I will then assume the role of an AP. So receiving the permit requests and going through the process of approving them, signing off and issuing them, and then ultimately closing them. So I'll keep it very, very straightforward and simple. So I'm one of your contractors. I'm coming in and I'm going to create a request. Which site am I coming to work on? So I may work for you on a number of different sites. So I'm going to come into this one called Custom Office, and I'm coming in to work for the FM team. And you can see here we can actually split out. It could be the FM team, it could be the client, it could be a tenant. All this starts to dictate the workflow process. For example, tenants may be totally responsible for all the work that they do on site, but maybe things like hot works, the FM company needs to be involved in that approval process as well. So it's there to manage those sort of situations. So first of all, this is me, specialist contractor. This is my demo system, so a contractor wouldn't be able to see this button. They wouldn't be able to change, therefore they wouldn't be able to see any other contractors on the system. So first of all, who are the people that I'm sending? I'm sending a chap called Steve, and I'm sending this chap called Richard. I can input car registration numbers if necessary. That's for security purposes, things like data centers. It can be used, it is not a mandatory field. And I'm going to do the work. I'm planning to do the work tomorrow. I'm going to start at 9. I'll finish it tomorrow, and I'll finish at 5. As I said before, the system does understand shifts. So whatever your shift rules are, it will then split up anything necessary into those elements. Now, this is where we're talking about what's going to be done. And this is where we're talking about the more complex setup, where we have, for example, all of the different items. So here's all the different pieces of kit that I've got on site. These are all the different types of services that I have on site. These are all the different types of locations that I have on site, the location types that I have on site, and then the zones. So you can see this is a 6th floor building with a roof, a ground level, basement, and external gardens or whatever. And in the past, I've also submitted lots of different RAMs to you. When you've got the fully configured custom data set, which is what we're talking about here, I can say, right, I know I've been asked to come in and work on this particular boiler. And when I select that boiler, it automatically populates where this boiler is, because the system knows this boiler exists in this boiler room. The boiler is a part of a group called HVAC boilers, and we group things together because sometimes you have people responsible for services, or sometimes you have people responsible for location types. This is part of the permit workflow process. The system already knows that exists in the basement. Now, if I just pull up, let me just move that across. I'm going to pull up a very similar setup for a data set. So I'm going to go and log in. I'm going to look at draft requests that I've got in there. Okay, so this is a request that I did a bit earlier, which is for exactly the same permit setup. So you can see they're starting at 9, finishing at 1700 on that particular day. And if I go to the next step, you'll now see in a standard data setup, we have something slightly different. So if I just select the RAMs from there. So we've got the same setup, exactly the same job, but now this is in a standard data set. So we don't have items. They're all locked out. We don't have individual locations. So the system knows that we're working inside the building. We're working on HVAC heating boilers, and we know that they exist in something called engineering plant rooms. Now in this here, when I'm filling in this permit request, because all this information is there, I can just, for example, say I'm just going to be welding a plate, for example. If I'm doing it in standard data sets, I would need to say, yes, I'm welding a plate on boiler 1. Exactly the same information that you'd write on a paper permit request. So you're specifying where the information is. So ultimately, when the permit documents are produced, it will all exist. Everything that's on here will exist on the permit document, and everything on here will exist on the permit document as well. So you're going to end up with the same information, just this information exists in a text area, whereas this information exists in specific boxes within the permit document itself. So it shows that you can still generate permits really quickly, but obviously you don't have the same levels of control in terms of clashes, because if I've got a clash going on here on boiler 1, I've got 2 jobs on boiler 1, that wouldn't necessarily come up here. It just clash in terms of activity taking place in engineering plant rooms. So I still get a clash, but I have to investigate those permit documents in far more detail than I would do if I've got all of the information within the system. So that's how standard data sets work slightly differently. If I now continue on with this process, I say, why is the work going to be done? It's building services fault. I'm going to be doing welding and brazing. And you'll notice the system here is already tagged asbestos. Asbestos in my demonstration system exists in this boiler room. So it's tagged it up as a potential hazard. So if I now go to the next step, I've got a grayed out submit button. So I've got some non-compliances on this. There are 3 types of non-compliances we pick up. Green ones indicate that this operative has to be site inducted. So Richard De Silva's site induction has either expired or he's never done one on this particular site. We also flag up what we call amber warnings. And again, this won't stop the permit request going, but it does flag up. You have an internal rule that says you want 72 hours notice of any work that's going to take place on your site. You may get this permit request and go, fantastic, they can do it tomorrow. I'm going to approve that. So it's not a hard block, it's a soft block. Hard blocks, however, are these ones, the ones in red. So it says you must have at least 2 persons trained in hotworks. Now, the reason behind that is that this chap has no training at all. But if I put someone in the system that I know is properly trained and go through the process to next step again, don't have to redo anything. It's all held and revised. I've now got a red submit button. So I've now got a compliant permit request that can now legitimately be sent off to an approver. Still flags up the amber warning because there's asbestos, and it will indicate that is the fabric of the building going to be disturbed? No, it's not from what I'm actually doing. But if I want to double check, I can still go to the asbestos register and check this. Now, don't forget, I'm still the contractor. I'm filling in the permit request. I can go and review my own RAMs again if I want to, just to check the documentation. And this is where I put in my PPE. So I'm going to be taking helmet, safety boots, and a high-vis jacket. So I can now submit that permit request, and it says, okay, we've got 2 permits here. We've got an access permit from 9 until 5, but when are we going to do the hot works? So hot works is actually being done at a particular time. Obviously only on that day, because that's the only day on the permit. It's about a 1-hour job, but I'm going to select between 11 and 1 for doing that work. Give myself a little bit of leeway. So I can save that. I've now got that done. I can now submit this permit request, and my job as a contractor is now done. I've got some requests out there that are now awaiting your approval. Okay, so let's come back in now and let's do through the approval process. Let me log in as an approver. So I'm now logging in as an internal approver, so I work for your organization. And I have a chart now, and this chart is basically my to-do list. So I may be responsible for 1 room, I may be responsible for a building, I may be responsible for multiple buildings. Whatever my area of responsibility is, this is my task list. So I've got some RAMs that are out there awaiting my approval because I'm a RAMs approver too. I've made some draft requests myself. These could be things like isolations and so forth. I've got some requests out there that are awaiting approval. I've got some out there are approved. This is an area of interest. I've got some overdue for issue. Why have they not been issued? Has the contractor not turned up? Have we not gone through the process? Is the contractor working without an issued permit? I need to investigate that. This is jobs open at the moment. There are no high-risk activities going on, and these are jobs that are overdue for closure. Contractor's finished, gone off-site, but I haven't yet gone through the closure process. So if I want to look at my request awaiting approval, here's my custom office, here's my 2 permits, the access permit and the hot works permit. So when I go into view the access permit, so I'm the site manager, for example, so I'm allowed to approve access permits. This is flagging up to me the clashes. Now, this is where you would get information not clear, as it were, in the standard data sets, because here we're looking at service clashes and location clashes. There are no locations in standard data, only services. So you get a clash on services. It flags up service clashes, which are people working on the same piece of kit at the same time. You've got location clashes, which is people working in the same physical space at the same time. And you've got what we call dependent service clashes, people working on jobs that one needs the water on, one needs it off. So we can pick up those. You're able to then go and view these other permits, see who the approvers are, talk to them, make a decision as to whether or not you're comfortable that these 2 jobs or 3 jobs take place in the same place at the same time. If you are happy, you can move on. This next box then tells you what's actually going to be going on here. It's specialist contractor who's coming on site. It's a guy called Steve Chandler, and there's his mobile number, and that will appear on the permit. He's attended by a guy called Frederick. The system has already checked they're trained and competent. If you don't have the training and competency module, you are accepting liability for these people when they come on site, that they are properly trained and qualified using whatever process you currently have at the moment. When's the work going to be done? There's the warning about lead time, so I can make a decision on whether or not I allow this permit to go through. Here's the details of the job, what's going to be done. So it shows that I'm going to be working in a particular location. I'm working on boiler room 1. I'm in engineering plant rooms, I'm in the boiler room, I'm in the basement, all the things that we saw earlier on. Here's the RAMs, so I can go and review those RAMs just to make sure they are still applicable. Don't forget, these RAMs were already approved by my organization before, so this allows me just to do a double check if I want to do a double check. RAMs, just like training and competency, have a duration. So if I've approved RAMs, they're valid for a period of, for example, a year. So I can go and view those. Of course, if I don't have the RAMs compliance module, you don't have the RAMs within the system. The system then relies that you're doing all the appropriate checks and balances on the RAMs prior to issuing the permit, because you don't have that competency module within the system. Special risks, we're doing welding and brazing, and there is asbestos present on the site. This is where we can bring in any isolations. So we've got a whole range of different isolations and certificates for here for electrical, mechanical, fire, and other. General works is is just a generic tab. So if you've got an isolation that isn't specifically specified here because type of work you do is different. We've got one client that works with explosive environments, for example. You can use a general works permit, and that you can then tailor to whatever you want it to be. So if I wanted to bring an isolation in, let's say I wanted to bring a fire isolation in, it opens up a new form for me that I just go through and fill in. So who's going to be doing the work? It's going to be we're going to do the work. Who's the people? It's FM company again, so we're doing the work ourselves. Who's going to be doing the work? I'll be doing it, and I might have Jean-Pierre with me as well. What date am I doing it? What service are we working on? Are there any RAMs applicable for us doing that service? Again, if you've got internal RAMs, you can have those in the system as well. If you don't need to have the RAMs. You can make that not applicable. You don't need to pick RAMs. So I can go through a process there, and what that would it will actually do is it'll create another permit document within the system for an isolation that my own team will have to then go through the approval process on, and it will then add that permit to the bundle as well. So I can, for example, put special requests on here. So if there are others in the same location, I can put that note on there. And if I'm happy to approve the permit, I put in my password, which audit trails that approval to me, and that has now been done. So that permit is now an approved permit. The contractor doesn't get any notification yet. He only gets notified the job is confirmed when all permits have been approved. So here now we've got, for example, the hot works permit, same information on clashes. I can see the status of other permits in the bundle, so I can see the access permit's been approved. It's just waiting my approval here. There's the information exactly the same. I can bring in isolation should I want to. This is the safety precaution checklist. So this is the list of questions that you want to appear on that permit document. So if you have, for example, paper documents at the moment, we can replicate your existing paper documents within the system. So what comes out at the end of the process looks and feels exactly the same as your current permits. Going through the process, okay, kit, they've got nothing in here for welding and brazing. Hang on, that's not good. I want them to be wearing gauntlets and I want them to be wearing visors. So I've done a safety check on their pros PPE. It could have been that the phone went and the person was in the process of filling it in, still submitted the permit request, but I've been able to put a safety check in and say, no, I need these as well. So when this permit request goes back to the contractor to say, yes, it's approved, there'll now be these items on the PPE list as well. If I wanted to reject a permit, I'd have to put in a reason why and then type it in here, because that will then allow the contractor to get information back. So it could have, for example, been wrong date. We can't have this permit taking place at the same time because of the clashes. So chaps, it's the wrong date. Please can you reschedule for next week? And then when that comes back to the contractor, they can access the permit request, they can edit it, and then they can resubmit it. So I put in my password, and that is now an approved permit. So all those permits are now approved. So they're now in this bundle here called approved permits or custom office, and there they are, access and hot work. Now here you have two choices. You can either print the permits in paper. This will then ship this information out to a printer, and it will then produce the paper permits for you. You can have a permit copy for the contractor. You can have a permit copy to go up in the place of work, whatever your current process is. Or you have the ability to do electronic signatures through the electronic signatures module. So let's fast forward now to tomorrow morning. It's now 9 o'clock and the contractor has arrived. So I'm the security guard or the permit officer at the permit desk. Contractors have turned up, Stephen Frederick, but hang on, that's not who's turned up. When I've looked at their ID, that's not the right people. So I can now go in and edit that team if I need to. If you've got the training and competency modules, if I put the new name in, it will then rerun the training and competency checks and ensure that that team is still properly trained and qualified to do the job. If I do edit the team and change the names, it will then update the permit and it will put those names on the permit, and you'll know that they are all properly compliant. Work's going to start at 9 o'clock. Yeah, that's fine. It's 8:30 at the moment, so you're here on site. What's going to be done? I can still review RAMs should I need to. I can still bring in any isolation if I need to prior to the work taking place. Guys, kit check, please. Yep. Okay, you're okay to go on site. I'm happy with that. So what I can do now is I can now generate that permit. In fact, I've made a mistake. What we actually need to do is sign the permit first. So apologise. So the first person to sign it will be the security guard, and then Steve Chandler. So I don't have one of these fancy touch screens, I'm afraid. We'll do that, and now I can reprint that permit. And it will produce for me a PDF document. So I get a permit document here, and I also get the associated RAMs. When I email these to Steve Chandler, who is the team leader, if you remember, on the job, he will have copies of them on his phone or on his tablet, whatever device he actually uses. So if I want to look at the permit document itself, this just shows you our standard template for an access permit. All the relevant information on that permit document, and there's the signatures and the times that it was all signed off and the time it was all approved. So this is just an interim document because it obviously hasn't been closed out yet and not signed off, but this is the actual permit document itself for this particular stage. So if Steve gets challenged on site, he can pull that permit document out and show proof of where he's supposed to be and what he's supposed to be doing. Now he's escorted. I can now issue that permit, so now Steve's allowed to work on site. I now go to the Hotworks permit, and I'm at the place of work with Steve. So we're going to go through the safety checklist. I can still review the RAMs if I want to. I can still bring in an isolation if I want to. Okay, we're going to go through the safety checklist. Have these been done? Yes. Yes, of course, these can be mandatory questions. It's just in my demo system, it's a little easier not to have to answer all the questions. And the answer is typically yes, no, or not applicable. Last kit check. Yep. So save the data changes. And then turn it off. So Howard sending it off. And Steve signing for receipt. Generate that permit. And this is all can be done now. This is typically on a smartphone or a tablet. So you're at the place of work. You can do all this on any mobile device. There's no apps to download because the system is all about access through the web. So providing you have access to the internet through a standard web browser, you will be able to do what you've seen me just do now. So there's the Hotworks permit. There's the safety checklist ticked off, and there's the signatures on there. Again, not closed off yet. So I can now issue that permit too, and Steve, you can fire up your welding kit and get working. So it's now what we call an open permit. There's the job. Now you do have the ability to suspend permits. Probably not applicable in a couple of hour job that I've got here, but if, for example, I was on site for 5 days, I was doing welding on Wednesday and electrical work on Thursday, and I needed to swap them around, I can suspend the permits and I can move them in time. I just have to move them within the time frame of the access permit itself so that everything is still compliant from a training competency clash point of view. So the first thing that would happen is we would tend to then close off the Hotworks. Steve's phoned me, said, job's done. I'm now going to the place of work, and we have a little mini audit that we can fill in, which can pick up any non-compliances of the contractor. So if they didn't do the work safely, what risks did they bring in? What was the non-compliance? And it builds up a matrix that can be investigated. So when the contractor comes in for their annual review, you can pull out a report that says, okay, guys, you were on site 20 times last year. 19 times we had a problem. Frederick Emanuel was on that team every time. Guess what? He's not allowed on site anymore. And then through the data admin section, you can actually go in and switch Frederick off from working on your site. So they would not be able to pick him for a permit in the future. So you have all that ability. You can put in information. So for example, left. So they didn't follow their waste process. That was on the RAMs, how they were going to pick up and tidy up their waste. You can take a photograph, you can upload the photograph, and you've then got a record of that. So I'm now going to sign it off. Steve is the first person that signs off and gives it back.
And in this instance, obviously, we're on site. I'm actually with Steve because it's something like Hotworks, which is pretty critical. So I'm going to be actually at the place, so I'm signing it at the same time. So I can now view that final permit, and this will now show me the final document that gets archived. So this is the Hotworks permit with all the safety checklists and all the signatures on there. So this is the document now that gets archived in the system pertinent to this job. Close that permit off. And then similarly, when we want to close out the access permit, Steve will sign this off at the front desk if necessary. And this can now sit in limbo because you might find that the people that need to close this out are not necessarily there. So that can be saved. And then on Monday morning, you can come in and sign this off. And that will then close out that permit as well. Close the permit. And the job's now done. So that's now the process from front to back, showing you the different ways that the competency modules can fit in, the ways that standard data and custom data fit in, and the ways that you can then generate a system that hopefully would meet your requirements rather than this is it, it has to fit what you have. So if there are any final questions, by all means, there's a chat box on your list there. If anybody has any questions, please do put them in the list, and my colleague Neil will then relay them to me, and I can answer them. But my contact details are on the screen, so if you want to relay any questions to me on a one-to-one basis, by all means, ping me an email. We can set up a time to meet and discuss them. So, Neil, are there any questions at all?
Nothing at this time, Richard, no.
Okay. Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for attending the webinar. As I said at the beginning, the webinar is recorded, so you will get an email with a link to that recording, so you can use that and pass it on to any of your colleagues that are interested in looking at what the e-permit system can do. So anybody that registered for the session, even if they've not managed to attend, will still get it. So you're always welcome to register for future webinars, and you'll obviously still receive any recordings. So thank you very much indeed for your time, and look forward to speaking to you soon. Goodbye.